You know, last week's episode was so bad that my mic literally died so it wouldn't have to sit through me complaining about it. And this week's episode was so good that I needed like 10 minutes of just sitting in the dark of my room to really like soak it all in. And so for that reason, I'm gonna go ahead and file a claim against Disney. They need to pay for my therapy because the emotional roller coaster that they're putting me through is actually worse than the one my ex put me through. Hey y'all, Snarky J Cosplay here. As of this morning, episode 7 of season 3 of The Mandalorian is streaming on Disney+. And I gotta go ahead and kick off the non-spoiler part of this review by letting you guys know my rating, which is a 9 out of 10. It's the highest rating I've been able to give any episode of this season so far, which considering we're gonna be ending the season next week is kind of a bummer. This episode is jam-packed with everything the rest of the season was missing. It's got some incredible cinematography that feels like Disney really put some real money into this budget for like actual visuals and not just casting random stars for cameos. It's got brilliantly choreographed action sequences with super solid CGI, but beyond that, it actually has an amazing script. It's a script with some real gravitas that makes it feel like you're once again watching an adult Star Wars series, something that actually matters in the grand scheme of things, and not a Sunday morning cartoon that they're hoping you'll go out and buy the cereal box for later. I don't know about you guys, but I felt super disconnected from all the drama in this season so far, mainly because it's just been poorly written and not really all that well performed. But this episode really has some incredible stuff in the script that lets the super talented cast really strut. This episode literally made me remember like how to feel things again.
Like some kind of 14-year-old kid or something. I mean, you remember feelings, right?
This episode also gave us some pretty neat Easter eggs and some cool tidbits that I really want to dig into, so with that being said, let's get into it. From this point on, there will be spoilers for episode 7 of season 3 of The Mandalorian. You've been warned. We kick off this episode with some very Blade Runner cyberpunk imagery of the seedier parts of Coruscant, and right away in this episode we get, of course, confirmation that Officer Elia Kane is in fact working with Moff Gideon. That's not exactly a surprise to anyone, but we do also learn that the pirates were in fact sent to Navarro by Moff Gideon, and Elia Kane lets him know that that attack was in fact interrupted by Mandalorians. She name drops both Din Djarin and Bo-Katan Kryze, and Moff Gideon honestly doesn't seem all that worried. I gotta say, I love Giancarlo Esposito. He pulls off the whole villain we love to hate thing really, really well. So once Moff Gideon has finished up his Imperial probe droid FaceTime session with Elia Kane, we see him walk through a hallway to get to a meeting, and he walks by some new stormtroopers that I'm gonna get into later in this video, but I really want to talk about. And from there, he joins a meeting of the Shadow Council. Now, the Shadow Council is basically what's left of the high-ranking Imperials that are basically gonna start building what's eventually gonna become the First Order right underneath the noses of the New Republic. There's a few big things that I want to mention that come up in this meeting. For one, Grand Admiral Thrawn is mentioned more than once, but they also acknowledge that he hasn't been present in any of these meetings, and he also just really hasn't spoken to anyone in a while. Moff Gideon seems to be discounting Thrawn because of this, but everyone else seems hell-bent on his eventual return. I'm fairly certain they're gonna show us why it is that he's been missing when we see him in the Ahsoka series later this year. We also get another little win for Legends fans. Grand Admiral Thrawn is initially brought up by a Captain Pelion, who is actually Thrawn's right-hand man both in Rebels and in the Legends series. Another Easter egg I want to point out here, one of the members of the Shadow Council actually has a very familiar name. Commandant Brendel Hux is actually the father of General Armitage Hux, who will eventually serve in the First Order. Now, it's super on the nose even for Disney Star Wars, but they actually mention that Commandant Hux is working on a project that involves cloning, and it's called Project Necromancer. It seems like that's gonna have an awful lot to do with how Palpatine eventually comes back. You know, more of an explanation than
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Which all but confirms that Disney is using season 3 of The Mandalorian in an attempt to justify what they did in the sequel trilogy, which is big ew, but I'm not even gonna get into that now. So after Moff Gideon chats with the Shadow Council and calls for the destruction of the rest of the Mandalorians, we cut to Navarro. We get some really cool imagery as the rest of the Mandalorians are landing on Navarro. They've got a huge ex-Imperial light cruiser with a mythosaur painted on it. I thought that was a really neat detail. And so when Bo-Katan's tribe of Mandalorians land on Navarro, they of course come to meet with the Armorer's tribe of Mandalorians. And the tension here is actually thick enough to cut with a knife. I really love this sequence, and I'm pretty sure we can chalk that up to the quality of the directing, which thankfully for us, the director of this episode, Rick Famuyiwa, is also directing the finale, so fingers crossed it ends on a high note. Greef Karga appears and interrupts the tension by pulling Din away to offer him 2 gifts. The first is a nice bottle of space booze brought all the way from Coruscant, and the second is a new and improved IG-11, now known as IG-12. IG-12 is now a vehicle. He's brought in by an Anzellan and offered to Din Djarin as a gift. So basically, a very small creature can sit in it and pilot it like this. And I literally had so many people in my DMs on Instagram tell me that this is what they thought was gonna happen, and I was like, no way, they wouldn't. Well, they did. They put Grogu in the robot. So it's not a ripoff of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles at all, right? Right? Unsurprisingly, putting a baby in a robot is a huge mistake. The thing is a menace. He throws fruit, he keeps slamming a yes button and a no button, which I kind of wish I had those buttons too. But if you watch really closely and you take a big whiff, you can smell the Funko people rushing to go ahead and get this thing made. Later that evening, after a rousing speech from from Bo-Katan, a bunch of Mandalorians from both tribes volunteer to follow her all the way to Mandalore so that they can go ahead and scout the surface of the planet and start to settle in. As they are on planet scouting it out, they are approached by a sail barge. It's actually really pirate looking, and the Mandalorians that get off the sail barge also look like pirates. Apparently they've been there since the Purge. They just managed to hide and wait it out. They definitely look like they might have scurvy. Again, it's a sail barge. I'm pretty sure these guys are just Mando pirates, but anyway, they know Bo-Katan and they're actually super loyal to her, but they're not exactly happy with her. Because a little while later at dinner, Bo-Katan is forced to admit that she actually did surrender to the Empire. And of course, in Mandalorian culture, surrender is really not cool. And here's where we learn exactly how it is that Moff Gideon came into possession of the Darksaber. After the Night of 1,000 Tears, Bo-Katan met with Moff Gideon. Bo-Katan laid down her arms, gave up the Darksaber, and basically ended the fight, all in hopes that the Empire would leave the planet, leave the rest of the cities, and stop any further murder of Mandalorians. Of course, Moff Gideon, being the honest guy that he is, totally betrayed her, took the Darksaber, and finished the Great Purge. Bo-Katan is obviously pretty broken up about having to admit that. But Din Djarin, ever the legend and perfect helmeted man, basically tells her that, hey, we're gonna rebuild, and he swears his loyalty to her regardless. And let me just tell you that if I were Bo-Katan in this moment, I would have folded like a cheap lawn chair. I don't care.
Stop it. Get some help.
Anyways, soon after that, the Mandos take off for the remains of the Great Forge, led by those pirate Mandos who know exactly where it is. While they're on that ship, a game of space chess goes wrong and Axe Woves and Paz Bisla end up in a pissing contest, which once again proves that Paz Bisla has no chill, and also I would die for him. I love this guy. It's Grogu in the Krangbot, IG-12, that ends up stopping the fight, but when it seems like peace might be on the horizon, instead they're attacked by a big monster. Luckily for us, we're actually spared a big CGI monster fight. It seems like the whole point of this thing popping out of the ground was just to destroy the sail barge, because it's right after that that the Mandos actually end up going underground and finding the remains of the old Great Forge. So those troopers that Moff Gideon has, the ones I mentioned earlier, they appear with jetpacks and armor made of Beskar alloy, and they start blasting at the Mandos. I want to talk about these guys for a second though. Yes, it's cool that we get yet another type of stormtrooper being added to the Star Wars canon, but what I really want to focus on is their legacy in design. These troopers, to me, look an awful lot like the old, really early designs for Boba Fett. So before Boba Fett was a bounty hunter in a league of his own, his design was actually being worked on in order to make basically an elite brand of super troopers. The armor was originally supposed to remain stark white, and these guys were just supposed to be your elite brand of stormtroopers. Of course, that idea was scrapped, and we got Boba Fett as he is today, or was before Disney f***ed him up too. Before long, the Mandos are kicking these troopers' asses, and when the troopers start to retreat and the Mandos follow, the Mandos are locked in what is essentially a big hangar. It's an ambush. Din Djarin is left separate from the rest of the Mandalorians, and he's taken down to his knees by the troopers, and eventually taken captive by Moff Gideon. I really want to talk about Moff Gideon's new look here. He's wearing black Beskar armor that not only reminds me a little bit of Darth Vader's chest armor, but the helmet has horns on it and it's red and black. It kind of reminds me of the whole Mandalorian thing. It's a cool reference to the fact that Darth Maul is one of the only non-Mandalorians to ever basically almost have control of the Mandalorians. I think that Moff Gideon definitely had something to do with Darth Maul back in the day, and I'm hoping they'll explore that a little more later. Moff Gideon claims that the Mandalorians are basically a disaster. They're gonna live on through him and this new super trooper thing that he's built. Bo-Katan threatens Moff Gideon through the door, proving once again that she is mommy and I would do anything for her. And so once Moff Gideon is leaving, having taken Din Djarin captive, Bo-Katan starts to cut a way out using the Darksaber in order to help the rest of the Mandalorians escape. When everybody is out though and Bo-Katan calls for him, Paz Bisla decides this is the way and he stays behind in order to take out the rest of the troopers. And at this point, I am literally on the edge of my seat. This is the best tension this entire season. He's clocking troopers left and right. His blaster overheats and he starts taking them on hand to hand, and eventually he's like out of breath, but he's got them all. But what happens? Moff Gideon's Praetorian guards show up. Of course, we know the Praetorian guards are from the sequel trilogy. This is definitely an early version of them, as the helmets are very different, but it's really cool to see their first appearance chronologically. And unfortunately for my boy Paz Bisla, he's just no match for these guys. They cut him down in what is literally one of the most brutal death scenes. Actually, scratch that. The most brutal death scene in this series so far. And as he's dead on the screen, it just fades to black, and that's the end of the episode. I was like, where's the rest of it? And this is the first time I felt like this through this entire season. Where was this energy last week when they were making us look at Lizzo and Jack Black and throwing in cameos like as if anybody gave a shit that Doc Brown is now in Star Wars? It's like they literally filled the season with garbage and then are ending it on a really good note in hopes that we'll forget that the rest of it was such a disappointing piece of shit. Well, guess what? Like a scorned ex-wife, I will not forget how terrible the rest of the season was, and I'm not gonna let anybody else forget either. I am human enough to acknowledge that this episode was genuinely probably one of the best episodes of the entire 3-season run of The Mandalorian. I thought the Grogu stuff was really goofy, but honestly, that was a write-off compared to how absolutely excellent the rest of it was. With that being said, I'm eagerly awaiting the finale. I find it really heartbreaking that I've had to sit here and honestly say that I dislike The Mandalorian, any episode of it really. This is one of my favorite series, this is one of my favorite characters, and the last thing I want to do is be in a fight with Pedrito. You guys know I love Pedrito. I would never, ever dog my boy, but this show has just not been it. Let's hope that between this episode and the next one, we get some good quality stuff and we can at least say that the season might have been dog shit, but it ended on a good note. And that's all from me. I've been Snarky J. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on episode 7 of season 3 of The Mandalorian in the comments below.